this is a situation where the two of them came up with this idea and she wanted in, and he killed them all and turned the tables and blasted her later? I mean, could that have been something?
It very well could have been. I think.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you again for joining another fabulous program of the Scary Movie Project. I am your host, Matt, and where we talk about scary movies and things that go bump in the night and haunted houses, and we're going to definitely talk about that. So we're glad you guys are joining us on a different evening tonight, not your scheduled time that you listen to our episodes, because, as you've seen, this is 50 years since the murders in Amityville. Now, we all love the Amityville horror, okay? We love those movies. There's 6 trillion of them, but you don't get those movies unless you actually go back to what happened, right? And so the story of the DeFeo murders, that happened. That was the murders that took place at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, New York. That is what happened. That was 50 years ago, if you can believe that. You guys know him. He's been on the show before. Blaine Duncan is here. He is an Amityville, I don't know the word, historian, expert, paranormal investigator. You've seen him. He's the producer for Amityville: An Origin Story, which is a fantastic documentary that you need to watch. He
Thank you.
also hosts Halloween Lives podcast. Let me stop rambling. Blaine, what's up? Thank you for coming
Hey,
on. You ready to
thank
talk
you.
about all this?
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me on the show. It was fun last time. I'm ready to get back
Yeah.
into it and talk about it. It's a big anniversary,
Yeah.
for anybody who's into this case. 50 years, man. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing story. And it's crazy that there's still stuff that's being discovered about it 50 years later. So, yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
It seems like anytime, especially on our show and any other shows I notice too, Amityville seems to be the topic that people go on tangents on these. I don't know why it's Amityville,
Right.
but so I was up there recently and I drove, did a drive by of Ocean Avenue. Beautiful day, got some great photos, got some great video. You all have probably seen some of it in teasing. It's a lot of fun to drive by there. It is a beautiful, affluent neighborhood. We'll get to that, I guess, shortly, though. But we'll start from square one, right? So, November 13th, 1974. Ronald DeFeo Jr., Butch DeFeo, kills his whole family. Okay. Guy does it, pleads guilty to it, whole 9 yards, etc. That's your, 30,000-foot view of it. So, what's the deal, right? Ronald DeFeo Sr. and his wife, Louise, they have 5 children, correct, I believe? And
Yep.
how did they end up buying this place? I don't know how that started, how they originally became the owners. Do you know all that?
Yeah, so the family had come from Brooklyn. They were living
Okay,
in
that's right.
Brooklyn, yeah,
That's right.
in kind of a small apartment.
Mhm.
And there's been a little bit of controversy over kind of how they came to acquire that house, but the story that I tend to lean into, because I think it's the way that it actually happened, was that Luis's father, Michael Brigante, was
That's
actually the
right.
one who kind of he paved the way for them to get there and provided the money for whether it was a down payment or he bought the house outright. That I don't know. But he was very involved with the purchase of that home, and there was some reported to be some tensions between Mike and Ronald Sr.,
Yep.
the father in this case, and that sort of always coming to his daughter's aid and maybe belittling Ronald Sr. a little bit for not being able to provide for his family. So those are all sort of just rumors, but that is what it is believed, is that Mike was actually involved in the purchase of that house, and which is where they lived for nearly a decade before they were murdered.
So here's a good question. I guess I've always wondered. That house is much older than that. You know anything? Do you know the original owners? Anything about who actually built and bought this house first? Do you know that?
Yeah, so John and Catherine Moynihan were the ones who built the house,
Hmm.
and there was originally a different house that sat on that property,
Oh,
a much
really?
smaller house, and they ended up moving that house. The house still exists. It
No
was
kidding.
moved just down the street or down the block, or up the block, I should
Hmm.
say, and it's still there. It's a much smaller house, but they had built it for their growing family, and yeah, so John and Catherine Moynihan, they were the ones who built it. And I know at least John did pass away in the home.
Oh,
So there
wow.
have been other people who have died in that house besides just the
Interesting.
DeFeos. But as far as Catherine, I don't know officially on her, but I do know for a fact that John did pass away in the house as well. And that was they built it in 1928. I believe they
Okay.
purchased it or they started that process around 1924 of building this new house, but the house was actually built in 1928.
Do we need to have a 100-year anniversary soon for the celebration of the
Man, I
house?
know that's the thing we're coming up on it, which is crazy. I
Oh,
mean,
that's wild.
yeah, it's an old house.
That's crazy. Okay, so I that is new to me because I never really thought about that. Wow. Okay, that
Yeah.
is interesting. So you mentioned, you know, the whole tension with the family. And that's really why these. I mean, it's why these murders happen, right? Butch DeFeo, he had his issues. He did not get along with his father. That was clearly mentioned. And then there was all this, like you mentioned, tension with the family. Let's talk mafia stuff, right? Isn't there a
Oh, yeah.
whole lot of mafia stuff going on? Because so DeFeo Sr. works at a dealership, right? And that is his father-in-law's. That's how he
Right.
got the gig, right? He's working for him,
Right.
and that's where I think the mafia stuff kind of plays in, right? Isn't that part of it?
It is, yeah. Ronald Sr. and actually Ronald Jr. worked there as well, but
That's
it
right.
was the Brigante Carl Buick dealership.
Yeah.
And the Carl, although spelled differently, a lot of people believe that actually may be tied to Carl Gambino being
Well, Gambino
associated with that.
family. All right.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know that that's, there's never been any proof of that, but that's
Yeah.
always been sort of the rumor or the tie-in. But there is no question that the DeFeo family had ties to the mafia. There's
Oh,
just not. Michael Brigante
yeah.
absolutely did. Don't know that he was necessarily a made man, but he definitely had ties. He flexed from time to time, and even the night of the murders, when all the police detectives were there and things like that, there was a very high level of security really that was needed because the detectives knew that this family was likely involved in organized crime. Even so much so that the night of the murders, after the detectives had gotten there and everything was kind of going down, somebody actually called the DeFeo household, who they believe was potentially a mafia hitman who just happened to be very close friends with the DeFeos and had stayed in that
Yeah.
house
Yeah.
several times. And Ronnie ended up actually making some allegations against this guy
Exactly. Yes.
very, very early on,
Yes.
stating that he was the one who was actually responsible for the murders.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting too. I forget the guy's name, but I've heard this.
Yeah, he was if I'm remembering correctly, his house had burned down or something like that. So he had lived or stayed with the DeFeos for quite a long period of
Okay. Yeah.
time. And Butch DeFeo, Ronnie DeFeo Jr. had ended up calling him a pretty vulgar name. And there was this belief that because he had, and this guy was a made guy. This was a known hitman,
Yeah.
and he was a made guy. And obviously, you don't talk back to those kind of guys. You don't call them names, things like
Yeah.
that. And reportedly, there was a hit that was put out on Ronnie DeFeo Jr. that was supposed to be executed the day after Thanksgiving of
I heard about this.
1974.
That's wild,
Yeah,
right? Oh
and
my.
yeah, so it's like The
I love
Sopranos.
it. I love it.
Yeah,
It's so great.
it's crazy, and and that's why to me, what it's so fascinating. Like you look at this house, and it's a beautiful house, but it's a very ordinary house in
Yeah.
this beautiful neighborhood. But the history in this house, the fact that not only were there six people murdered in there, unfortunately, and then you have the whole, horror side of things with the Lutzes, but then you combine like the mafia stuff and all the, who
It's
knows, the
nuts.
gangsters coming
I
in and
know.
out of that house. It's just, the history there is unbelievable. And it's just so cool. That's why it's just so fascinating for me.
Well, as Tommy DeVito, or in real life Tommy DeSimone in the Goodfellas, when you kill a made man, you know what's going to happen to you. So
Right. Exactly.
it's not
That's
going to
right.
go well for you.
Exactly.
So, all right. So we're on the date, the 13th, right? Now, as the story goes, so the murders happened very early that morning,
Correct.
or well, if you look at the movie, the 3:15 a.m. thing or whatever, I don't know if that's accurate, but then does Butch DeFeo get up, go to work, and like then come home, and then he runs off to this Harry's bar in Amityville saying, "My family's dead. Help! Help! Help!" And yeah, take us through like because he's nuts, and he goes through
Right.
this like 24-hour period of I don't know what happened to I did this, and it's just like okay, so yeah, we gotta
Right.
find a place to start there.
Yeah, so to kind of set the stage, Ronnie DeFeo was a very well-known heroin user. He was a junkie.
He was a junkie. He was an alcoholic.
He was an
He was
alcoholic. He was a junkie. Hung out with the wrong
yeah
crowd. I mean, he was just a bad dude. And I've
yeah
interviewed a lot of people that knew him or had run-ins with him over the years.
yeah.
And I have yet to meet somebody who was like, "Hey, he was a solid guy." When he
No,
was a kid,
no,
I interviewed people who knew him when he was a kid, and they said he was different then. But it sounded
yeah.
like once he hit about 15, 16 years old, he was just a wild man, threatening
Yep.
people, just causing all kinds of problems. But yeah, so the story goes that around on November 13th, 1974, sometime between, they say 3:15 a.m. I tend to believe it was a little bit earlier than that. I tend to think it was sometime around 1 a.m.
Okay.
Based on some of the information that DeFeo actually gave in his confession, that he was watching a movie called Castle Keep, which is a very violent war movie. And he said during that film, this figure with dark hands handed him the
The
rifle. He
black
got up.
hands, the dark hands.
Yeah,
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 and he
yeah.
got up and he executed his family. And the reason why I say I think it happened before 3:15 is because that movie actually ended. I don't quote me on this, but it ended somewhere around like 1 or 1:30 a.m., something like that. So it would
Okay.
make more sense that it happened if he said he was watching that film. It would make more sense that it happened earlier than that. But what happened, whether he shot him at 1 a.m. or 3:15 a.m., at that point, he started to basically clean up the crime scene and started collecting the spent shell casings and some bloody rags, and he like a rifle sheath, if you will, and he started getting that all put into these pillowcases. And he went and ditched the rifle in the Great South Bay in for Richmond Dock, which was just a 3-4 blocks down the road. And then he went into Brooklyn and he dumped some stuff. But then he kind of started really setting the stage, and he went to work back at the dealership that morning,
Yeah.
and he started setting the stage to sort of create an alibi for himself in some ways, by saying, "Hey, I can't, I've been trying to call home, nobody's answering,"
Yeah, yeah,
playing
yeah.
this whole game. And then he ended up leaving because he said he had a stomach ache, and he left and he went back home. Supposedly he, goes to the house and he tries to get in, but the doors are locked, things like that. And then he ended up going and hanging out with his girlfriend Mindy and his friend Bobby Kelsky for certain portions of the day. He didn't actually hang out with Bobby, but he saw and interacted with Bobby at some point. Bobby Kelsky is a really interesting figure, and we can talk about him in a little
Yeah.
bit. One of his best friends at the time, and so he interacted with some people. And while he interacted with Bobby and with his girlfriend Mindy, he was again setting the stage that that he couldn't get a hold of the family, that their vehicles were parked there, but nobody was answering the door and things like that. Fast forward a few hours, he ends up going to the bar, and Henry's Bar, which is at the end of Merrick and Ocean Avenue, just a few blocks down from the house. He's shooting craps and playing pool with his buddies. And according to one of Ronnie's good friends, his guy by the name of Tommy Marr, who we interviewed in the docuseries, he said that Ronnie would come and go. He'd come and have a drink, and then he'd leave, and then he'd come back and he'd have a drink. So it was nothing for him to kind of go back and forth and be at
Yeah.
the bar and then leave. Well, apparently he had a drink and he said, "I'm going to go home and break a window and see if I can get into the house." He does so. He drives down Ocean Avenue. He goes in. He actually does break a window on the house to get in.
Mm.
And a few minutes later, his car comes screaming back in the parking lot. He runs in, throws the door open, and said, "Oh my God, you got to help me. My mother and father have been killed." And that was sort of the stage that we then, that was set then for the remainder of the night. Bobby Kelsky, his best friend at the time, along with several other bar patrons, jumped into Ronnie's car. They tore down Ocean Avenue, got back to the house, and that's when Bobby went inside and discovered that Ronald Sr. and Luis were both dead in bed. And the 911 call was made from the kitchen, and that was it.
That's a question that I guess I would never thought about either. Was who made, you said the call original was made in the house.
Yeah,
Okay.
one of a gentleman by the name of Joey Yeswit, who was there that night, who
Okay.
was just a patron at Henry's, and I'm sure knew
Yeah.
DeFeo to some extent, but obviously saw the kind of the scene that was breaking out there, and jumped in the car with, I think there was four of them that 4 or 5 that jumped into Ronnie's car, and they took off and went back to the house, and it was during that phone call that it was kind of, there was a lot of conversation going on. Ronnie wouldn't come back into the house at that point.
Right.
But Ken Griguski, who was a patrolman at the time for Amityville PD, he was the first officer who arrived there. And he entered the house, and prior to that, he saw, Ronnie was standing outside and crying and was beating on the hood of a car, over his car. And Griguski went inside, and that's when he saw, the mother and father, that they were dead.
Yep.
He crossed over to the boys' bedrooms, or the boys' bedroom, I should say, and he saw that the two young boys, Mark and John, had also been murdered. And that's when he went back downstairs, And at that point, Ronnie had either come into the foyer or he was somewhere in the dining room area or something like that. And he had said, I have two sisters. So Groguski went back upstairs. Another patrolman at that time had arrived. So the two of them went back upstairs and they discovered Allison, who was 13 years old. And then up on the third floor, which they thought was just an attic, up on the third floor, they discovered Don DeFeo, who was 18 years old. And the entire family had been murdered.
All face down in their beds. Yeah. Right.
They were. There's some
35
controversy.
millimeter, whatever shotgun. I forget
Yeah,
the
35 Marlin rifle. Yep,
Yeah.
a high-powered hunting rifle, and should have been heard most
I want to
definitely.
get to that too. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
should have been heard. There's a little bit of controversy with the positioning of the bodies. There's a few things going on. Number one, it was believed that none of the DeFeos ever woke up. Well, evidence actually shows
they say the two
that.
girls they think the mother and the Allison they think were alive at the time. Is that right?
Yeah, well, you can see the
Yeah.
way that there's blood splatter from underneath Louise DeFeo, which indicates that she was sitting up when she was shot, and that
Okay.
the blood splattered across the bed while she was sitting up. So we know that she was awake. Also, Allison DeFeo, who was across the hallway from them, had gunpowder in her eyes, so
Oh, really?
her eyes were at least open when she was shot.
Oh, wow.
So she was at least aware that somebody was.
Forensics.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
What I will say is, there is some controversy, and I tend to buy into it a little bit, even though there's not a ton of evidence to support this. But my belief personally is that Ronald Sr. Actually didn't die in bed; that he had gotten up out of bed.
Mm.
And the reason why I say this is there is some small evidence, I'll say, that sort of supports this, and that is number one, that there was what was reported to be marinara stains in the hallway, pizza split from a meatball or something like that.
Yeah, right.
That was said, but there appeared to be blood in the door frame of the master bedroom door, and
Okay.
also if you examine, and they're unfortunately on the internet, and I hate to even say that, but if you
Yeah,
examine the autopsy photos of the DeFeo victims,
sure.
Ronald Sr., it very clearly has what looks to be an entrance wound on his chest and an exit
Mm.
wound on his back. And what
Okay.
I mean by that is it goes in small and it comes out big.
Yep.
So he has what looks to be just sort of like what you would expect from a bullet hole, right? I mean, just a small diameter hole, but on his back there, the skin is actually like blown away.
Wow.
So my belief is that he was shot. Ron Sr. was shot. Luis DeFeo sits up and says, what? Oh my God, what's going on? He shoots his mother, and he thinks it's done and over with, and he's killed them both. And to his surprise, Ron Sr. Comes out into the hallway where he shoots and kills him. And again, this is all theory and conspiracy and things like that,
Yeah.
but I just think that there's enough evidence that proves I don't believe he actually did die in bed the way that
Wow.
it was claimed. So and he was a big guy. He was like 270
Yeah.
pounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Right.
my belief is that Ronnie was going to need help to get him back into bed, and that's where some other characters come in down the road. But
Scary.
yeah, it's not as cut and dry as I think we tend to believe it is. My personal
Yeah.
belief is that, and maybe I'm giving away too much
Sure.
here, but my personal belief is that Ronnie DeFeo Jr. did kill his family by himself,
Oh
but I
yeah.
believe he had help with the cleanup, if you will. I think
Okay.
that's a very high probability.
That is wild. Like there's so many. So you had help with the cleanup. I don't know who, and unless I can't imagine who would go and help someone with that. I can't kind of think about that. But
Mhm.
that's just nuts. But it is what it is, whatever, right? So you get these three high-powered, these six people to kill. Right? There's four siblings and two parents, right?
Mhm.
No one, like you said, I would know every detail. It's messy because this guy's. It's not like he's an assassin. He doesn't know what he's doing. He picked up a shotgun. He's half
Right.
drunk. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing.
Right.
Dad doesn't die. The kids, whatever. You have no idea if there was a fight. They're all in the bed. They could have been put back in the bed. I don't fingerprints, whatever. I don't know the whole thing. But that long story short, the question I'm getting to is what everyone gets to, which is how in the world does a high powered shotgun go off 6 to 10 times, let's just say, without anyone hearing it, neighbors and calling? I stood outside the house just recently and I look at the distance. I'm sorry, it's just not possible. Like
Right.
what is how do we think about that? How is that factor in that. That is so strange.
Yeah, so there were eight total shots fired that
Okay, there you
night,
go.
and what's even more incredible is that that rifle would not hold 8 rounds, so it had to be reloaded at some
Oh,
point.
is it a
So
6 or something, 5 or?
yeah, I don't. I'm going to assume it was 6.
Okay.
I don't know that for a fact.
Yeah.
I've never actually
But that's
handled that.
interesting. Yeah, to have to reload it.
Yeah, so
That's
it
interesting.
definitely had to be reloaded. Um, I don't know how the shots were not reported by more
It's
people.
crazy.
I do know that it's been reported that a neighbor did in fact hear the rifle shots, but did not want to get involved because of the mafia activity and
See,
ties to
that's
this family
so
that everybody was aware of.
interesting. That's so
Yeah.
interesting.
There were reports that another neighbor had believed she had
Oh
heard the
man.
shots, but that it was duck hunters out on the river.
At 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, right, and that's the
Right, right.
thing. It's I think I don't think there's any doubt that somebody heard it, right? You've been to that neighborhood, you've
Have
seen
to.
the house. The houses are not that far apart from each
No, they're
other.
not.
So this is a rifle that should be heard from up to a half a mile away if you were to fire this thing outside.
Oh
So
God, yeah. And the weather was calm. It wasn't rain, thunderstorms or anything, right? It was
nope.
calm. Yeah.
No, yeah, it wasn't like it was masked by thunder
Yeah.
and things
Right.
like that. No, I mean it was just a typical November evening
Yeah.
or morning, I should say. And
Oh goodness. That
so
is
it's
crazy.
it doesn't seem likely, and that's where some people believe when it comes to the paranormal side of things that maybe there was some supernatural involvement there that kept
Mm.
the noise down. Personally, for me, I don't tend to buy into that. No disrespect to anybody who
Yeah.
might, but I don't buy into that. I think it's much more simple than that. I think there were people that heard those shots, and if nothing more, that they heard the shots, but they also heard the DeFeo's dog going crazy when the
There's the
shooting was going on.
dog too, right? Okay, so your answer gives me clarity to myself because the whole mafia thing, and it's like saying, your neighbor here downstairs is making a whole bunch. It's just John doing whatever, right? Right?
Right,
Or they don't want to get involved because we know it's the mafia folks. I'm not getting messed up with them, right? That
right,
makes perfect sense. Honestly, it really
right,
does.
right.
You do what you're gonna do. The dog part of it though, too, right? So yeah, so that was that on top. But again, same thing. We hear it, we don't care. We're not getting mixed up in this. We're not gonna
Right,
do that.
exactly. Yeah, and the thing is, like I said, it was well known, especially in that neighborhood, that the DeFeos were connected. There
Yeah,
were reports
yeah,
that Ronald Sr. would flash a handgun at people if he didn't like somebody.
yep.
There were reports that Ronnie DeFeo Jr. I interviewed somebody one time that said Ronnie DeFeo Jr. was walking down Ocean Avenue shooting a rifle into the air. It's to think that
Oh
you
man,
have this mafia family who at that time that was really the height of the mafia, right? I mean, the mafia
New
was a
York
thing.
'70s. That
Yeah,
was it.
that
That was
was
it,
that
man.
was the height of the mafia.
That was it.
And I'm making this up, but for the Millers living next door, nah, we're good. We're just gonna pretend we're gonna go back to sleep and not listen to
Now,
what's going on.
for me, I mean, if it's not a horror film, it's a mafia movie, basically for me. So I
Mm,
would have been the guy looking at my window, like, "What's going on?" I would have been so I
right,
wouldn't have done anything, but I would have been
right,
like super interested.
right. Yeah,
So
yeah, no, for sure.
what is this Dawn conspiracy she's involved to? You know what I'm talking about? Well,
Oh
what is
yeah,
this? What
I
is
do,
this?
and I'll be honest with you. I for a very long time I thought there could be maybe a sliver of truth there. Um, there are some strange things that happened with Don DeFeo, and number one, I'll give you if you look at the crime
She was
scene
the
photos,
second. So how old was he when he killed them?
he was 23 and she
And
was
she was
18.
18. Yeah,
Yeah, so
okay,
she
yeah,
was the next oldest.
yeah, okay.
But if you look at the crime scene photos, Don DeFeo's headboard. So Don DeFeo was shot basically at the base of her skull.
Mm,
Um, and uh, a lot of blood,
mm,
and her her
yeah,
her her blood was soaked into the sheets and everything.
yeah,
But if you
yeah.
look at her headboard, it's wiped completely clean. There is not a drop of blood on her
Yeah, that
headboard,
wouldn't. That'd be all
which
over the
doesn't,
place.
yeah, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So something is weird there. I don't know that I necessarily have an answer for that. But there were reports that Don was trying to get out of that house.
Right.
And there were other reports that Don and Ronnie were closely connected, that they even unfortunately there was some accusations that there was some incestuous stuff going on, which I don't
Yeah, I
believe, I
heard
don't
that
buy
too.
into
That's
at all.
crazy.
um
I
but
don't want to
but
know.
Right, exactly. But they had this close connection, and Ronnie from very early on. I mean, realistically, within the first few months, even had started making some comments that his sister was involved. Now, and this is getting off track a little bit, but Ronnie told so many different versions of
Oh
this
yeah, who
story.
the hell
You
knows what he's talking about? Right, it's crazy.
Exactly, exactly. But I don't doubt that there could be a possibility that Dawn did wake up. She was on the top floor of the house, and one story that he told was that she had woken up and she had come out of her room and leaned over the railing and was like, "What's going on?" And he told her to go back to bed. He only told that story one time, and I always found that very interesting. I kind of always latched onto that because
Mm.
it never matched up with anything else, but it seems likely, right? Because the mother and father were both shot twice, so there's 4 rounds right there. He
Yep.
walks across to his sister Allison's room. There's the 5th shot. He then walks over to so that he walks
Yeah.
over to the brothers 6, 7. Uh, so there you go. There's at least
There's your
7 rounds.
reload.
Yeah, yeah, and then you got this reload. There's a very real possibility there that she would have heard that and gotten up, right? I mean, if somebody's
Yeah.
shooting a rifle in your house, I would think no matter how dead of a sleep you're in, you're going to get up. And
Seriously.
again, this was a weird house. Who knows all the stuff that went on in that house? And maybe for her to go, you know what? I'm going back. I'm maybe not going back to bed, but I'm going back in my room. I don't have any idea what's going on. Or you hear your brother say, "Everything's okay. Go back to bed. I'll come
Right.
up in a minute." Right.
Right.
I think that is the most likely scenario there.
Okay.
Like I said, I did there's another thing with her nightgown that Don's nightgown that she was wearing. There was unburned gunpowder on that. Now,
Yeah.
what that can indicate is that she fired a rifle that night. What it can also indicate is that she was shot at very, very close range. And I think that's more likely the case, that she was just shot at an extremely close range, so that there was that unburned gunpowder on her nightgown versus, it came from actually firing a weapon that night. So, there are a lot of people out there who think that she did have something to do with it. Talking with her friends, I've interviewed several of her very close friends at the time. One of them appeared in the docuseries,
Yeah.
and I don't nothing about what I know of Don DeFeo tells me that she had that kind of rage in her to help him out. There were reports that she was trying to get out of the house to move down to Florida with her then boyfriend. I've talked to him, and he claims that, number one, they weren't even dating at the time, but
No.
number two, that wasn't true, that she was not trying to leave. So there's a lot of mystery that surrounds Don DeFeo. I think, unfortunately for her, as probably all of the DeFeos, her name specifically has been really, dragged through the mud
Yep.
with this case,
Yeah.
and which is really unfortunate because she can't defend herself. But I truly don't believe she had anything to do with the murders now. And like I said, that my opinion on that has changed. There was a time when I definitely did, but I just think more so after, I was in the house in 2017 and being able to walk the steps that the killer would have walked. I do believe it was very doable to be able to do that in a fairly quick time frame.
I want to ask him on that, but first, is it possible that this is a situation where the two of them came up with this idea and she wanted in, and he killed them all and turned the tables and blasted her later? I mean, could that have been something?
It very well could have been. I think the more likely story, and this is again just a personal opinion of mine,
Yeah.
I truly believe that the target that night was Ron Sr.
Yeah, of course.
He
Of
wanted
course.
Ron Sr. to die.
It sounds like a lot of people wouldn't have minded, quite frankly, if he was
Right.
out of the picture,
Right. He
honestly. It
wasn't a
sounds
very
like.
nice guy. Yeah,
No,
he
he
was not a
wasn't.
very nice guy.
Even his kids
But
didn't like him. Yeah. So,
right. So Ron Sr. was the intended target that night. Luis DeFeo, by default, had to go because she was sleeping in the bed next to him. And I think Ronnie he was that whacked out of his mind, drugged out of his mind. To him,
oh,
that was a
the
very
spouse is going to go too. Yep.
right. That was a clear decision. He was
The
going to kill
package
mom
deal.
and
I hate to
dad.
say I'm sorry, but
Exactly.
yeah.
But going back to my theory that I think Ron Sr. died out of bed, my thought is if the kids were not intended to be the target that night, there was a 9-year-old boy in that house, a 13-year-old girl,
Yeah.
a 12-year-old boy in that house, and then of course Don DeFeo 18. My belief is that one of them, not sure who it would be, but that one of them came out and saw something in the hallway. Whether that be Ronnie standing there with a rifle, whether that be Ron Sr. laying dead
Running
in
over,
the
trying to run
doorway,
away or something. Right.
right? Whatever it might be, those kids saw something,
Yeah.
and he said, Ronnie, Jr., Butch,
Yep.
said they got to go
Yep.
because
Yep.
talking to some of Ronnie's friends who knew him very well up until the very end there, they said he loved those kids. They said he was very proud of his
Uh,
brother, for instance, who had just made the Massapequa Mustangs football team.
uh,
He was very proud of his siblings, and he was very close to his siblings. But I think they were unfortunately collateral damage in a way, and somebody saw something that he knew they needed to go. And even when you watch some of the interviews, when you talk about, or when the interview subject or the interviewee would ask Ronnie what, about his brothers and sisters, you could almost see his demeanor change a little bit, that
mm,
he felt sorrow for what he did to his
wow.
brothers and sisters, which in my mind, being the compulsive liar that he was, he concocted this wild theory that he loved his brothers and sisters so much, there's no way he could be the monster that would have killed them. So that was his sister Dawn who killed him. And
Uh,
so again, this is all personal theory and
mm,
speculation on my part, but that is what I believe, is that Ronald Sr. was the intended target. Luis DeFeo had to go because she was next to him, and that
yeah.
one of the kids saw something, and they unfortunately just became, again, collateral damage to this whole entire thing.
That really makes a lot of sense. Honestly, it's almost like I'm thinking of movies. I'm thinking like Fargo, when he,
Yeah,
wipes out the couple that drove by, or The Departed, when at the end when they're just wiping everybody, it's just like,
right,
you saw something, you got to go. You've
right,
got to go now. And we said, he's no assassin. This guy was a knucklehead.
right.
But when you're that crazy and you start firing a gun, you're not going to stop either. You're
Mhm.
just not going to stop. So,
Right.
all
And I
right,
think
so
he was selfish enough to know that if he got caught, he was going to go to prison. So
oh
he
yeah,
needed to try to make the best
oh
alibi
yeah,
for himself by eliminating anybody who could potentially point the finger at
yep,
him. And he was so selfish,
yep.
so drugged out of his mind, that he thought, I'm gonna kill everybody now because of this, which is really just unfortunate.
So you've been in the house. You've had a chance to do that. So when you said you walked it, did you walk from what the report from? Did you take the actual like parents' bedroom and everything, and to how does that? I mean, I know you were overwhelmed just to be
Right.
there, but did that feel odd? Could you understand the moment you were in? Like, how does that? How did that
Yeah,
feel?
it was I didn't do it for any any personal satisfaction or
No,
any sort
no,
of
no.
macabre reasons.
Right.
It was simply because I wanted to walk those
I would have done the
steps,
same thing.
yeah, to
Yeah,
see, just for truly research
yeah,
purposes,
yeah.
could somebody move through that house as quickly as I did? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, I was able to make that move while stopping to, and I wasn't like I was standing there pretending to raise a rifle and those kind of things,
I
but
get it.
I
Get it.
stopped for 20 seconds at one point
Yep.
to reload, right, and
Uh,
then climb the stairs,
yep.
and I was able to do it all in under a minute. I
Is
mean,
that right?
and that was moving at a, I don't want to say a fast pace, but that was moving. And now that would be if it happened the way that we believe it happened,
Mm-hmm.
where it was systematic. He went from room to room to room. Going back to my theory, and here's another thing, we talk about the time, right? That the reported time was 3:15 a.m. Well, if the movie ended at 1 o'clock and he shot the mother and father, maybe the 3:15, when everybody heard the dogs barking, maybe that was when he killed off everybody else. I don't know.
That's
So
interesting.
there's so many unknowns, and unfortunately, with him passing away,
Right.
we I feel zero sympathy for the man whatsoever.
No,
But
no.
I do know that the day that he died, there was a part of me that felt sadness, because I knew that we would never actually know exactly what happened in that house. And
Of course.
I
Of
think you
course.
can piecemeal the story together, which is sort of what I have done in my own mind, of looking at all the stories that he's told. And I think there's a sliver of truth in every single one of them. And if you
Somewhere.
use sort of a practical approach to it, what would make the most sense? What is not, created for the movies, but what truly could have happened that night? I think it matches up pretty closely to, I think, my theory of, like going back to it, that Ron Sr. was the intended target and the kids were just had to go.
Now, you talk about watching the movie. Are we talking about something on broadcast? And have you been able to actually find out when this was aired? And is that why we're giving our time? Or are you?
Yeah, so Castle Keep, and I know I have the document somewhere, but Castle Keep was the movie that was on that night.
Okay.
And that was the movie that he reportedly was watching in the TV room, which was on the second floor of the
Okay.
house, right next to the master bedroom.
Yep.
There were four bedrooms on the second floor, and one of them had been turned into this kind of TV sitting room. And you can go back and find out through like a TV
See,
guide,
that's what I
basically.
was. Yeah,
Yeah, to see
that's
when that
very
movie,
cool.
yeah, and it's been, I'll be honest with you, it's been years since I've
Track
looked
it
at that
down.
document, but I do know it was sometime around 1 a.m.,
Well, makes perfect
1:30
sense.
that
Yeah,
the film ended.
makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
All right, so we know what happened, right? We're fairly certain about all that stuff. So he's finally arrested, what, less than 24 hours later, and he does eventually say within that time period, does he confess when he's arrested, I think, right? Does he say that?
Yeah, so what happened was he was put into protective custody
Mhm.
fairly early on in the investigative process because going back to that mob thing, it was initially believed
Right.
and based on Ronnie's own testimony, he tried to put it on the mob. He tried to put it on this hitman.
Yeah.
And so
You'll be
the
dead quick.
detectives, correct, yeah, the detectives knew that there was, if the mafia had in fact wiped out this family, which made no sense because the mafia doesn't kill kids,
No.
but if the mafia had in fact wiped this family out, that Ronnie DeFeo Jr., his life could be in jeopardy. So they put
Yep.
him in protective custody. They took him
Sure.
to one of the precincts, and they ended up moving him around to several precincts that night. But at first he was, almost not cocky, but he didn't show a lot of remorse throughout the process, which the detectives found very odd. He said some really horrible things about Don being a pig and being fat and things like this. That they were like, Butch, that's your sister.
Yeah.
Your sister's dead, and you're saying these things. And what kind of was the break in the case is they had discovered through forensics that it was a 35 Marlin rifle that had fired the bullets that night. And lo and behold, what do they find in Ronnie DeFeo Jr.'s bedroom? The box for a
I
35
mean,
caliber Marlin rifle.
come on, right?
Yeah, I mean, once again, just complete stupidity. But
Yeah, really.
so they found this. They determined that okay, Ronnie owned this rifle. The shots had come from this rifle, and they ended up pulling Ronnie in, and he started telling this whole tale about how he was there, but the mafia guys were downstairs killing everybody, and he was hiding, and they were like, Ronnie, that just doesn't make any sense. Tell
No.
you had to have seen more than that. And then he was like, well, yeah, actually, they came up and got me and forced me to do it.
Like
And
every
they're
30
like,
seconds, it just
right,
changes.
exactly.
Crazy.
And then they said, Ronnie, that doesn't make any sense. Come on, tell us the truth. And then that's kind of when he broke down.
Yeah.
Now, certain people believe, and I'm sure they may have, it was the 70s, and who knows what happens. Certain people believe that he was roughed up to get that confession. Um,
Mm.
may have been.
So, you know what? And this has, I think, been knowledge, and I know as someone who lived in Long Island area, grew up there, and they mentioned Suffolk County, right? They're kind of no joke back in the day,
Right,
right? They would do that stuff like you were saying, and they
right,
would do that if they wanted to. They would F you up if they wanted to get what they
right.
needed from you. So
Right, exactly.
I
And
believe
and
that. That
there is a high probability they probably did. Times were different back then,
yeah,
right? You would
absolutely.
never be able to get by with that in today's world, but it was the
No.
70s. There weren't cameras, there was no
Nope.
cell phones, things like that.
Nope.
So did they maybe encourage him to confess through physical abuse, right, wrong, or indifferent? They may have.
Very
But he ended
possible.
up obviously, confessing to the entire thing, saying once I started, I just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And he just moved again. That his initial story was that he went from room to room to room and
Yeah.
killed the family.
Yeah, he always reminds me of Charles Manson, I guess because they look the same, but
Right.
just the nonsense stories that just go on and change by the minute, and it's just
Right.
like, dude, this guy has clearly got a lot of problems,
Right.
obviously, and
Right.
he like I said, there's very little sympathy for that man being dead,
Right.
obviously,
Exactly.
but
Yep.
to your point, he's the only one that knows what happened, right?
Mhm.
Any famous case like this where there's speculation of what happened. Once the person dies, we never know. The story
Right.
dies with it, and we don't ever get
Yes.
to find that out. So right behind the house. So is Oyster Bay then right? That's a little further down, I believe. Is that right from, or is that
Uh,
Long Island Sound? I
I'm
don't
I'm not familiar. So it's the
know.
South Shore it's the
Yeah,
South Shore. The creek leads to the South Shore, which obviously leads to the Atlantic. I'm not familiar with an Oyster Bay. There could very
I
well
th-
be.
I think that is, but yeah. So there's a little channel that runs in there. I don't know the name of that. Right behind the
It's the
house.
Amityville Creek. Yeah.
That's the Amityville Creek. Okay.
Amityville River, Amityville Creek.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then
Yep.
if you cross, and whenever I go, I always drive across the other street so you can see the backside where the boathouse is, of course.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so we mentioned affluent neighborhood. You're not buying a house there for less than $900,000, quite
Right.
frankly.
Right.
But yeah, knowing the gunshots going off, quiet neighborhood. Obviously, when this happened, this was something that these folks were pretty shook up. I would assume, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it still to this day looks like the house you'd, leave your doors unlocked and trick or treats and, family at Halloween and things. So I'm assuming
Right.
this was like a major, major thing that really messed people up, I would guess,
It
afterwards.
it did, yeah. And the thing is, and I've always tried to be very respectful of this fact that, we're 50 years, 50-year anniversary now is here. And but there are still people in this town who knew these people. They knew the
Oh, yeah.
DeFeos. They were friends.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've always tried to be very respectful of that fact that, the DeFeos were real people, and that
Yes.
this crime shocked this town. And
Yeah.
it
Terrible.
was sort of that sleepy community that you talked of, where people didn't lock their doors and they really didn't have a whole lot to worry about. And you also just think about that was the time back then. Most people don't sleep with their doors unlocked nowadays, but back in the
Nope.
70s, people didn't worry about that kind of thing.
No.
And that all changed that night. And there was, questions of, is there a killer running around in the streets of Amityville, and what happened here? And there were a lot of people that were affected by that. There were a lot of ripple effects
Yeah.
of those murders that I think are still, in many cases, still felt very deeply today. And if you look at some of the online forums, if you get somebody from Long Island who lived through that, or specifically Amityville who lived through that, some people come unglued when they
Yes.
start hearing people talk about this case. And to a certain extent, I totally understand it. I really truly do. But yeah, it definitely affected a lot of people. All the kids were going to school in that town. The family had lived there for 9 years at that point, and Amityville wasn't that big of a city. I don't know what the population was back then. It's right around
No,
10,000
it's
now,
not
but
it's not big.
yeah,
Mm.
so the DeFeos were well known, so it was, it hit that community really, really hard. And like I said, I think there's a lot of ripple effects of they're still felt to this day.
So you think about that, if you were, under the age, you were around 10 or so, you were around 20, you're in your late 60s, 70s, possibly if
Right,
you're in your 80s, maybe you're in your 30s back then.
right,
So
right.
it's been a long time. It's
It
been a
has
long
been.
time.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and there are still a lot of people that live in that town that knew them,
Yeah.
especially the younger kids. John Matt was 9 years old, so
Yeah.
all of his classmates who knew him, yeah, they're not even 60 years old yet,
Yeah. That's
So
right. That's right.
so it is there are a lot of people that still know them, and a lot of people that will for a very long time. So those memories are going to be there, and as much as the haunting and that whole story they want it to go away. I really think the darker cloud is the six people that were murdered in that house, because
Yeah.
it was six human beings that lost their lives.
So in that river that runs behind there, did that where did they send divers to go find the gun? Is that where they didn't his dumb ass threw it actually right behind the house? I mean,
It
really?
it wasn't right behind the house. It was off of Richmond Dock, which
Okay.
is
Okay.
probably 4 or 5 blocks down. It's
Might
the
as well
same.
be. Yeah.
It's Richmond Dock is right where the inlet of Amityville, the
Yep.
Amityville River comes in off of the
Yep.
South Shore. So yeah, he threw it. It was only landed 40 or so yards off the
Oh,
dock, but they found
man.
it, relatively early on in the investigation. About 2.5 days later, 3 days later, something like that, it was recovered.
Well, he obviously, didn't know what he was doing. I mean, look,
Right.
there's, he did what he was going to do, and
Right.
that's just what it is. But and
Right.
obviously he was found guilty, of course, and 625 to life sentences. Obviously, never got
Hmm.
out of prison. Yeah, I've seen plenty of interviews with him. He's like Manson. He's crazy.
Right.
You never got to meet him though, correct? No, you never.
I never did. He's one of probably only a few people in this case that I've at least not had some sort of interaction with. Even George and Kathy Lutz, I've
Yeah.
spoken to both of them very,
Right.
very briefly. But Ronnie DeFeo Jr. wrote him several times over the years, and he never responded. I had come close at one point. I thought I had a pretty good lead on being able to get over and to talk to him, and it just unfortunately didn't work. While we were shooting the docuseries, or in pre-production for the docuseries, was when he passed away.
Yep.
And that really hurt, because it was our intent to do whatever we had to do to get him on camera. And
Yeah.
and look at that as essentially going to probably be his final interview. And he unfortunately died. Well, I don't want to say it. He died in
Yeah.
March of 2021, and we weren't able to do that. So
Was he in prison in New York? Well, I
he
don't even know
was.
where it was.
Yeah, he was
Was
in
it? Okay.
upstate. Yeah, he was in
He
upstate New
was.
York.
Okay.
He served many years at Greenhaven Correctional Facility, but he was at Sullivan, which is where he passed away at. was at Sullivan Correctional facility, and yeah, my understanding is it was COVID. It was at the
COVID.
height of
That's what
COVID.
I heard. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had spoken to several security guards or corrections officers who worked at the prison at that time. And for the days leading up to his death, he reportedly had an extremely high fever.
Mm.
He was having difficulty breathing, and they called for an ambulance to transport him. As he was being transported to the hospital, he went into cardiac arrest and died on the
Wow.
way to the hospital.
I don't think he was in very good shape to begin. But
Right, he
anyway, I mean,
wasn't.
whatever.
Right. Yep.
That's neither here nor there.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's a terrible story, and um, you know, it kind of segues into I wanted to talk about this mainly because this is what brings us to the Amityville Horror. Without this is not what happens, right?
Right.
And I don't want to spend if we even we'll save that for later, but then what? A year later, you've got George and Kathy Lutz finding this deal, quote unquote,
Right.
and they move into this house. So I wonder how neighbors and I don't know. I could never live in a home where I was told there was just this mass murder, essentially. That to
Right.
me, I don't care how much it costs. There's no way I'm doing that.
Right.
So I don't know, but do you think? Let me ask you. I think you've mentioned before you don't believe the house itself is haunted, correct?
I don't believe the house itself
Self
today is
George, a lot of what
haunted.
he was doing. So
Yeah, I
what
think there.
then?
Yeah.
The residual stain, like Scatman Crothers says in The Shining, when you burn toast and you leave something
Hmm.
behind, right?
Right.
What do you think, if anything, is left behind though from those murders? What do you think? Anything in that house? Is there anything, or what do you think
Yeah,
about that?
I don't know that I don't know that the DeFeo story necessarily had any impact on the haunting other than there may have been that energy may have still been in that house at that time. I don't think the DeFeos had ever were a part of what happened to the Lutzes. I really truly
No,
don't
I don't
believe
think
that.
so.
Um, you know, Missy Lutz claimed that there was Missy Lutz, who was the Lutz's daughter.
Hmm.
She was 5 years old at the time. She claimed that there was a little boy who used to come into her room. Now,
Yeah.
Missy Lutz, her bedroom was Allison DeFeo's bedroom, which was right next door to the bedroom of John and Mark DeFeo. So, you know, yes, could the DeFeo spirits have been there? Of course, and nobody will ever really know that for a fact. But to me, going back, I guess, kind of to your original point, I don't believe the house is haunted today. I think what took place there was whatever it was moved on,
Mm.
and I think that there's definitely it's hard to ignore the fact that six people were murdered
Yeah.
there, and I'm sure there has to be some sort of leftover whatever that naturally is going to be there. But I think it's been so long that I don't think I don't I think we would have had more reports of the house being haunted today if it truly were
Mm.
haunted today. Now, I will say that I have interviewed many people. I don't want I'll use the word many, but it's not like it's dozens of people. But I've interviewed many people who were in that house after the Lutzes who did have experiences. Um,
Okay.
Even further down the road, 5, 10 years down the road, that had weird things happen to them in that house. And even myself, and I know I mentioned this on the show last time when I was in the house, I had peculiar experiences. I won't ever say that they were paranormal, but I had peculiar experiences in that house, and so at the end of the day, six people were murdered there, and one of the most famous hauntings, if not the most famous haunting of all time, took
Yeah.
place in this house.
I mean,
So, are people going to be creeped out when they're in that house? Certainly, and that could have been part of what I was feeling that day as well.
sure.
But I personally don't believe the house is haunted today.
So besides Amityville 2, and we'll touch on it another time, but it kind of goes into it. I'm curious as to maybe just because of the subject matter. I mean, there is no standalone film that deals just with what happened in that night, right? There really isn't anything, and I've always
Right.
kind of been curious as to why that is. Maybe that is subject matter wise. I don't know,
There is
but
there is another film. It was directed by Dan Farrens called I believe it's just the Amityville Murders I think it's the Amityville
I think I
Murders.
maybe have heard of that.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it though.
it I think is along the same lines is Amityville 2: The Possession, where there's a lot of liberties that are taken with the story. But that one does revolve around the DeFeos themselves, or that whole story as well.
Interesting. So yeah, you've done so Amityville origin story. We'll plug it.
Mhm.
That's the one you worked on. What did you find? I don't know. I guess you always find out something interesting, but you were mentioning how you met with a lot of people that still live. Were you surprised by the amount of people that still live there from that are still around? Was that surprising to you? And you mentioned their reaction that is still like a touchy thing, huh?
It is,
Yeah.
yeah, and I don't know that I was surprised by it. I
Yeah.
think what I get surprised by is, you'll, for instance, and I still continue to research this story to this day. I will strike out with 10 different people, and I will get shut down, and they'll tell me to get lost and all
Yep.
kinds of things, right? Because they don't want to talk about this
Oh
story.
yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
then I'll strike gold, and I'll
Yeah.
just find somebody who has
I'd
never
love
told their
to.
story,
Yes. Yeah,
right?
of
Who
course.
who's never told their story before,
Yeah.
but they have stories to tell,
They
and
sure
and
do.
and they're getting late in life, and they
Yeah.
want to share these
Yeah.
stories. And those to me are sort of these lost witnesses of the Amityville story, are what I am attracted to at this point, because the story is the story. I've researched both the DeFeo, the Lutz story, until I'm blue in the face. But now what I'm really after are these lost stories. And unfortunately, we're again 50 years down the
Yeah.
road. We've lost a lot of stories over the years. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people that are gone who are
Yeah.
connected to this case.
Yeah.
And so when I find one of those little golden nuggets out there, it's like I just try to do whatever I can to just squeeze everything out of that interview, because sometimes even just the littlest details to me I find incredibly fascinating. Where some people might be like, "Well, what's the big deal on that?" It's like, because we don't have answers to this stuff, and there's only so few people that are here anymore who can provide these answers to us. So,
That's right. First
so
person narrative. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, like I said, for probably every 10 people that tell me to F off, there's somebody there that, says, "Hey,
Right.
we'll tell you what we can."
I've experienced it on the stuff I've shot where people don't want to talk about urban legend things that we don't want to mess with that in
Right,
the one per. Oh yeah, I got stories for it exactly.
right.
So
Yeah.
nowadays, right, everyone's got a phone, of course, it's a camera, and everyone has a social media site. And so if this happens today and six people are killed in the middle of the night in some small town, is this just massive news that everyone hears about? Do we get the? I know the Lutz is moving in becomes the Amityville horror part of it, but
Right.
would it be a huge story today? I wonder what would happen today if this happened, right?
The only thing that I can really attribute it to a recent crime that I'm aware of is the
Yeah,
the
trying to think of
crime
something, right?
the crime that happened out in I believe it was Utah, with the college students,
Okay,
and
sure.
which just coincidentally happened to take place on November 13th as
Did it
well.
really? Oh
It
Lord, I
did.
didn't even know
Yeah.
that. Okay,
Yeah. So
wow,
I
that's
think that was
scary.
Utah. Was that Utah? I think it was Utah.
University of Utah. No, Idaho.
Idaho, Idaho. Yes, it was.
University of
It was
Idaho,
Idaho.
Moscow.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
That one to me, I think was shared a lot of similarities with the DeFeo case, as far as like
yeah.
just the shock that that town and that community probably felt. But what I think is interesting about that is, you know, that town and that community said, "We're not going to." And who knows if they ever referenced to Amityville, but we're not going to allow this house to become the next Amityville Horror. We're not going
Yeah,
to allow
exactly.
Zach Baggins from Ghost Adventures to come in here and do an investigation. We're
That's
going to
right.
tear this thing down.
That's
We're
right.
going to knock it down, and we're going to try to
Well,
let
that's
the community move on.
what they did in Milwaukee with Dahmer. They
Right.
they tore down the apartment building. It's
Right.
gone. It's just an
Exactly.
empty lot now because they were like, no, this is not going to be some sick like tourist attraction.
Right.
No.
Right.
Gacy, I think this, oh, maybe his house. I don't know. But yeah,
And
yeah,
and I
yeah. That
and
makes
I
sense.
have to believe, if the town of Amityville were to do it over again, had they known what was
That's
going to
interesting,
happen,
right?
I think that house would have been torn down. I truly believe it. I think the family, the Brigante family, probably would have torn it down, because the DeFeo's memories was really tarnished by this. I
Do
think
you
I think they would have torn it down.
do you think at some point, look, we all drive by it. We go to take pictures of it. Whatever. Please, again, people, if you're going, please be respectful. Do not go knock on these people's doors. Do not step foot on their property. It is private property.
And you are on camera. I promise you. They have a huge security camera system. Inside and outside the house. And I can say that because I've been in it. They have cameras everywhere.
And you know what? They have a photo of me taking a picture of their house while I'm standing on a public sidewalk. I know I do not step foot on their property. Please, y'all, don't do that. But anyway, public service announcement part for us.
Right.
But do you think somebody at some point, either one or two things, either someone is nuts and they buy it to make it a total, theme park, essentially, where, hey, come to the house, $10, whatever, or does someone buy it and say, enough of this, we're tearing this house down? Do you think that happens at some point in the future? I wonder.
I know that there was a gentleman by the name of Sam Stangl in the 1970s, late 1970s, who tried to purchase the house, and I interviewed Sam. He's a great dude. He was a very wealthy individual, and he bought the house with the intention of making it a tourist attraction.
Really?
And it ended up falling through. It was even reported in the papers that the Cromarty family had sold the house to Sam. Okay. He was interviewed, saying,
I'm glad that didn't happen. That would have been nuts. That would have been nuts.
Right, exactly. And I think that was in 1979. So we came very, very close to having that happen. I think because we're so far past this, we're 50 years past the DeFeo crime. We're almost 50 years past the anniversary of the Lutz's story.
Yeah.
I think the home has, it's been passed on from family to family to family. There's
been a few owners.
There's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 owners since the Lutzes live there now. I think the house itself has become a part of the community again. I really believe that.
That's interesting. That does make sense though. Yeah.
I think if it were to be torn down, it would have either been, very soon after kind of everything broke, with the haunting and things like that, and really at the height of the hysteria when Amityville was literally under siege from tourists and things like that.
Can you imagine? Oh my God.
Yeah, it would have been terrible. I'm honestly I would have never condoned this, but I look at the Ed Gein case. Somebody in that town burned down Ed Gein's house because
yes, of course,
mysteriously started on fire just before they were going to auction off all his stuff.
Exactly.
I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't somebody in that town, or even somebody connected to the DeFeo family and maybe the mafia crimes, that didn't, when that house was empty, didn't throw a Molotov cocktail through the window or something and just get rid of it.
Arson,
Yeah, exactly. Again, not condoning that by any means, but I wouldn't have been surprised if something like that could have happened.
For sure. Well, it's a fascinating deal. I mean, so anyway, 50 years, that's amazing. This happened before my time, that's for sure. And this story will go on way after our time as well. We'll be long gone. We'll keep going. But we're going to finish this week, go on for forever. So this part of it is done, right? But like we said, this is a special episode for you guys. But we have our normal episode time coming up on Friday. And that is going to be part 2. We're going to talk more. We're going to talk Amityville Legacy. You want to talk about all 300 movies that have been made about it?
Yeah, I think we're up to 315 now, actually. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, so we're going to give you guys some more of that. So stay tuned for that. I think you'll find that fun. And we can just kind of dive into, what your thoughts are and, your experience there, what you've thought about it. I'd love to get thoughts on it. We can kind of rank some movies, and I think you guys will enjoy all of that stuff too. But Blaine, thank you very much. You are the Amityville expert for all of us. I want you to tell us more about what you're doing, where people can find you, but especially you're working on something really, really cool. Talk about what you can for that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I just put out a new series. It's called Ghostland, and it's a series of interviews with owners and residents of haunted locations, just them telling their story, shot very cinematically, very beautiful. I want it to just be a storytelling thing. So you can check that out. Go to Instagram, go to ghostland.series for more information on that. Find the link to the series. And it's just a lot of fun, man. I enjoy anything that has to do with the paranormal. And, obviously Amityville is a big thing for me. And then obviously you can go to MGM Plus and check out Amityville, an origin story. It's a 4-part docuseries, and I think it truly is the definitive story on this case.
Absolutely. Watch them all. Watch you and your brother doing Halloween Lives. Please
That's
watch
right.
that
Halloween
as well.
Lives, yeah.
Those are great. That's a great podcast. So yeah, we'll do this again. And thank you all for joining. So stay tuned again. And remember, if you don't get it, you don't get it.
The Scary Movie Project podcast. Learn more at thescarymovieproject.com.